Have you ever felt your oath of loyalty buried by the system, your silent sacrifices erased into nothingness? Tom Vance, a 67-year-old Navy veteran, stands before a leaking chemical container, his heart pounding like the bombs over Harbor Light long ago memories of fallen comrades, the sting of being denied by the VA, and a society that mocks him as paranoid. Overwhelmed by helplessness, yet deep down his vow to never leave anyone behind compels him to act, even with death looming. Can a forgotten hero save the entire port of San Diego from erupting into hell, and how will the Coast Guard rue the day they doubted him? This is a story for you middle-aged veterans, anyone who has fought and been cast aside to see how belated justice can change everything. Stay tuned until the end to discover Tom's undying legacy. All right, dear friends, get ready for a tale that will leave you in awe. If you feel this in your heart, hit like and subscribe, then comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's so exciting to connect with viewers from everywhere. The worn baseball cap hung silently on his head, like a relic no one bothered to ask about. Its patch embroidered with a lighthouse in the heart of a storm had long since lost its stitching, yet that light, though merely thread still, shone on, as if it were the only spark left within him. Tom Vance, age 67, began his day as always, an old wrench in hand, a faded denim jacket on his back, and steel containers stacked like memories he could never tidy away. San Diego Harbor at dawn carried its familiar scents: salt, machine oil, and wind. But there was something in that morning breeze that made him pause, something off, kilter. It carried a memory without name, one only those who had returned from the battlefield would recognize. It wasn't the smell of the sea, it was the smell of doubt. Tom lived as though he did not exist. Folks called him Old Tom, the maintenance man, as if his life began the moment he polished pipes and oiled steel cables. No one knew the hand clutching that wire brush had once diffused bombs beneath ice-cold waters, had carried children out of blast zones without leaving a footprint. No records, no medal ceremonies, only silence, aching joints, and sleepwalking nightmares to the rhythm of midnight waves. Operation Harbor Light, an operation known only to his unit. A mission that never officially existed, to rescue souls the world refused to acknowledge were imprisoned. They returned, but the price of coming home was living as if they'd never been there. When he filed his claim at the VA, they told him his records were blank. The young woman at the counter sounded as if he'd made it all up, so he stayed silent. Just as he was silent when inspecting Container 47 that morning, when he opened it, a pungent cloud gushed out. It wasn't the smell of machine oil, it was what he had once smelled in a chemical weapons bunker in the Middle East: ammonium nitrate. The odor shot straight into his lungs and down to his heart. Tom froze. His vision blurred for a moment, not from age, but from a wave of memory crashing back. Black waters, exploding drums, his last friend sinking into a fiery swell. He bolted. His left knee screamed like it was being cut with a knife, but he didn't stop. He sprinted to the Coast Guard Staciona, neon-lit, spotless, modern room where he stood before young faces, hair shaved close, uniforms still smelling of detergent. He spoke slowly and clearly, with the voice that once gave orders amid chaos. Container 47, it's leaking. If you don't evacuate, the whole harbor will blow. But they didn't listen. A young officer, probably not 30, patted his shoulder as if comforting a confused patient. You're overreacting, sir. Our sensors show nothing. Go home and rest. Tom said nothing. He gripped his cap's brim, as though holding on to the last shred of faith in himself. He didn't argue or complain. He simply turned and walked away, under glances laced with pity, amusement, and plenty of indifference. Yet one pair of eyes never left him. Jake, a 22-year-old intern, stood quietly in the corner. He didn't understand it all, but he recognized the patch on Tom's cap. He'd seen it in the black and white photo his grandfather hid in his wallet. No medals, just 4 men standing by a broken ship. Jake stepped outside to the windows, watching the old man fade behind the steel cranes. That silhouette wasn't a madman's. It was someone who had seen what others hadn't yet glimpsed. Then came a barely audible crack from the container area. No one noticed except Tom. He whipped around, his eyes drawn back. His heart tightened not in fear, but because he had heard that sound once before. In 1984, 3 seconds before hell opened its gates, the wind from the Pacific had shifted overnight. It was no longer the gentle, salty breeze of the coast, but carried a blade-sharp chill, the kind of wind seafarers call the breath of the storm. In the small maintenance cabin nestled among the aging machinery, Tom sat silently before his handheld radio, listening to the steady beeps of the harbor's alert system like a futile artificial heartbeat. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. That night, unbidden memories flooded in. The darkness of the room could not block the light of the past. Tom recalled the deepest dive of his life years ago. Beneath inky black water, he piloted a mini-sub through a field of mines. His comrades trailed him. Dozens of imprisoned civilians lay ahead, separated by a chain of sensor bombs. Leave no one behind, that was no slogan but an unspoken covenant among those who'd clasped hands against death. He had honored it, but the price was erasure from half his lifetime. Now, amid modern San Diego harbor, he sensed something about to erupt. The next morning, he returned to Container 47. His flashlight trembled in his hand, yet its beam was steady enough to reveal a fresh crack snaking along the steel. Beneath the container, a puddle of bubbling liquid, milky white and viscous like acid, oozed outward inch by inch. Tom felt his heartbeat shift. He raised the radio and hit the emergency button. "This is Vance in maintenance. Container 47 is heating up. Evacuate immediately. Repeat. Evacuate immediately." Silence for 3 seconds, 3 seconds longer than he'd waited for the VA to answer his appeal. Then a man's voice crackled in, low but weary, as if interrupted in a critical briefing. "Mr. Vance, our sensors show no anomalies. You're disrupting operations. Stand down." That was Captain Ramirez, the man who trusted readings on a panel more than the tremor in an old veteran's voice. Tom stood mute, gripping the radio as though he could crush it. The pain made no sound, it surged like hot sand underfoot on desert patrols. He'd survived war, but no one had trained him to survive in a society that forgot men like him. Silently, he turned back to the container without awaiting further orders. Beneath the steel shell, faint hissings grew louder. As he bent again, his hand brushed a discarded sensor module, ripped from the official system. A shrill alarm cut through the harbor's false calm. Less than a minute later, the alarm fell silent. Over the internal channel, someone chuckled, "Equipment error, too old." Tom did not laugh. He had secretly recorded the entire exchange, a habit from Harbor Light, when every radio transmission could become the only proof if everything fell apart. He gazed toward the sea and murmured to himself, "If the ocean won't save them, I will." Elsewhere in the Coast Guard station, Jake, the 22-year-old intern, sat at his computer, typing furiously, eyes wide. He just traced the emblem on Tom's cap to an old blog post about Harbor Light, a covert mission the government never acknowledged, a name never taught at the academy. Yet the photograph matched. Jake realized the man they mocked yesterday was no madman. He was a piece of forgotten history. Jake rose to speak, but a sudden gust scattered Ramirez's paperwork across the desk. Sheets fluttered everywhere. One floated at Jake's feet. A 3-year-old report, Chemical Hazards in Storage Area 47. Sensor systems require reinspection. A red stamp marked the corner. Yet nothing had ever been done. The waves began to pound harder, the water's surface taut, like a heart under pressure. From his cabin, Tom watched the small vessels moored near the container laden with people, cargo, fuel. If a spark ignited, the entire district would become a sea of fire. Tom tightened his cap, then stepped out. His hand shook, but his gaze remained unblinking. Suddenly, his radio crackled an urgent, choked whisper. "Mr. Vance, I believe you, but they won't listen." Tom paused. He didn't need to ask who. Only one person could have spoken. The air grew heavy as lead. The chemical stench spread like the breath of demons, clinging to skin, seeping into lungs, turning every inhale into a battle. Tom sensed it the moment he stepped out of the cabinot, the familiar scent of fuel or gasoline, but the low simmer of a disaster beyond rescue. The sky above the harbor shifted hue, the sunlight paling as if afraid of what was coming. The pride of the facility, its sensor system suddenly froze. Screens flickered and died, as if technology itself bowed before what was brewing beneath the steel. A software glitch, perhaps a long-hidden viruser, simply negligence masked by technical jargon. Whatever the cause, the danger was real. Panic spread like wildfire, but it was too late. Tom needed no further orders, no more denials. He sprinted toward the old tugboat once used for Cold War training, now abandoned like himself. In spare moments, he had personally overhauled it, no requests, no recognition, as though he knew one day it would need to live again. "This old geezer still runs," he murmured, kicking the dusty console as he fired up the engine. It rumbled to life, slow but steady, like an old heart that refused to quit. He lashed the tow cable to the flotilla of small vessels loaded with cargo and workers, then fixed his gaze on the water ahead toward a safe zone, far from the harbor trap. Over the internal radio, his voice boomed deep, clear, without hesitation. "This is Vance. I'm leading the boats out. Stay calm. Follow me. We'll be safe." No one had ordered him, yet his words carried the authority of a man who had stared down death without flinching. The crew aboard the vessels flailed in fear, but when his voice crackled through the loudspeaker, it was as though a lighthouse had lit in the storm. They steadied, then obeyed. In the command center, the Coast Guard belatedly recognized the crisis. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Alarms blared too late. Captain Ramirez screamed evacuation orders, but the moment had passed. The explosions struck like the earth itself was punching upward, not one blast, but a symphony of metal collisions, followed by bursts of red, orange, then blinding white light. The ground shook as if someone had snapped the city's spine. Flames ripped through the sky, black smoke billowed like the devil's arm sweeping over San Diego. Containers rocketed skyward, tearing apart like tin can smashing into walls, into water, into each other. At the edge of the blast, the little tugboat was hurled aside. Tom, standing near the wheelhouse, was thrown like a weightless old shadow. His baseball cap spun loose above him, a wayward compass, then plummeted into the sea. In that fleeting moment, the harbor light patch on its brim flared one last time like a final, winking farewell. Amid the chaos, Jake charged without thought. He kicked open doors, ran through smoke, ears ringing from shockwaves, eyes stinging from chemicals. He found Tom lying amid twisted metal, half soaked and half bloodied. Jake dragged him clear of the blast zone, sliding over the burning dock, shouting for help. When Jake placed a hand on his shoulder, Tom's eyes fluttered open. Jake's fingers brushed a long scar on Tom's left forearm, hardened skin etched with a fine, deep line, identical to the one in the photo from his grandfather's album. Jake choked on the word, "Harbor Light." Tom smiled, blood at the corner of his mouth. "I kept my oath." Rescue sirens roared across the harbor. People ran, screamed, cradled children, called each other's names. Yet most vessels were already clear thanks to the decrepit tugboat and the man no one believed. The explosion ruined only part of the port. Hundreds of lives remained breathing, crying, grateful. But in the field hospital, Tom lay silently, tethered to a respirator, an unnamed hero amid headlines of catastrophe. Far among the wreckage, a fragment of container blown hundreds of meters away was recovered. On its twisted iron surface, 3 rusty words emerged: Beirut, warning, the phrase from the long-forgotten report. The warning had existed, but no one heeded it. Except one man. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax, grab a glass of water, then settle in for the rest of this incredible story. Comment 1 if you're still with us, so we know you're here. After the explosion, San Diego Harbor lay silent as a steel graveyard. No ship horns, no workers' voices, only the wind sweeping through charred containers, whispering an empty sound beyond naming. Tom Vance remained unconscious in the hospital room, his chest rising and falling to the rhythm of the ventilator. His eyes were shut tight, as if listening to a world no longer his own. Outside, nobody remembered him. The press spoke of an unexplained chemical blast, and not a single line mentioned the old maintenance man who sacrificed his body to save hundreds of lives. Weeks later, as the city began to patch its physical wounds, a young engineer named Alex was assigned to inspect the speaker system. The grandson of a Navy veteran, he knew how to spot value in what others overlooked. Amid a tangle of blackened wires at the base of the control tower, he discovered a small object buried in the battered old radio, its casing cracked but its indicator light still blinking. He powered it on, and then no need to adjust channels, no need to hunt for a signal. A voice crackled through, bridging every distance. "This is Vance. Stay calm. Follow me. We will be safe." The voice was hoarse but resolute, not a command, but a promisino to himself, but to others. Alex froze, his chest tightening. In that moment, the entire harbor seemed to hold its breath. Then a phrase slipped through, "Harbor Light Echo." Alex didn't grasp the full meaning, but he knew one thing: this was no ordinary maintenance man's voice. That night, he uploaded the raw audio to YouTube. No edits, no background music, just the voice and one caption, "The voice that saved San Diego Harbor, unsung hero." By the next morning, the video had over 1 million views. By afternoon, the wave had spread like a tide. Comments flooded in, "That's my father. I've heard my grandfather speak of someone like this. We've forgotten them for too long." Veterans recognized the code, Harbor Light Echo, used in a late 80s covert operation, and the name of the commanding officer, none other than Tom Vance. Jake, who had rescued him from the inferno, became the bridge. He contacted a network of former Navy special ops, sending them the audio, the cap patch, and the old photo. Their response came within hours. "That's him, the only man brave enough to return when everyone else pulled out." 1 week later, under a downpour, a military SUV pulled up to San Diego Hospital. A tall, silver-haired man stepped out, General William H. Barker, retired nearly 2 decades. In his hand was a tattered baseball cape retrieved from the sea floor with the Harbor Light patch still stitched by a single red thread. "I don't just know this man," Barker told the press. "I owe him my life." He recounted how, in 1984 in the Gulf of Oman, he'd become trapped in a bomb hold. Tom had turned back alone, carrying him over 200 meters through minefields and rubble. Against orders, without waiting for backup, and since then, both men had stayed silent for the sake of national secrecy, because some truths must remain buried. Now Barker refused to remain silent. Public pressure erupted. The Coast Guard reopened every closed file. A host of old reports emerged from the dust of neglect. One memorandum, stamped in red. "Chemical hazard comparable to Beirut. Replace all sensors in storage area 47. Ignored, quietly shelved. At his bedside, Tom still lay unconscious. But the room was no longer empty. Jake sat nearby, holding the dry cap. Ramirez, the officer who had dismissed his warning, entered, removed his own cap, and knelt beside the bed. "I am sorry," he said, "not to any person but to the air itself, and to a conscience awakened from the ashes." A week later, Tom passed away, never to awaken. But at his funeral, for the first time, uniforms stood at attention, a flag-draped casket, and a eulogy from the Department of Defense. General Barker spoke through tears. "Some people need not be remembered, but we are wrong if we forget them." From a small speaker on the altar, the final recording played one last time. "Stay calm. We will be safe." And this time, all of America listened. There was no longer any way to stay silent. The wave of truth had breached the steel walls of the system. Procedures might delay accountability, but the hearts of the people could not be postponed. When Tom's voice echoed through millions of electronic devices, not merely as a sound, but as a shared heartbeat, something shifted deep in America's spine. The Coast Guard held a press conference. The media packed the room. Bathed in bright lights, Captain Ramirez stood in his uniform, no longer as unshakable as before. His eyes were red, his voice choked as he declared, "We were wrong. Tom Vance was more than a maintenance worker, he was a soldier, a mentor, a hero." Those words carried farther than any report ever filed, and for the first time in his life, Ramirez removed his cap before the public not out of protocol, but out of moral obligation. Days later, in a solemn ceremony at the military hospital, Tom, still frail but awake, was awarded the Medal of Honor. The American flag draped across his thighs, morning light glinted on the badge at his chest, not for show, but as the final piece returned to its rightful place. When invited to speak, he gently shook his head. In the silence of hundreds, he spoke slowly, avoiding the cameras. Honor isn't in the medal, it's in the deeds, in remembering each other after everything that's happened. No one added another word. None was needed. Recognition, sometimes, isn't about ceremony. It's in the way a child hands him a drawing, a lighthouse rising above a stormy sea. It's in how the dock workers quietly established a fund in his name without press releases, simply so that people like him wouldn't be forgotten. They called it the Vance Fund, Leave No One Behind. Online, his recording became a symbol. The YouTube video soared past 10 million views. On X, TikTok, and Instagram, #HarborLight Hero trended nationwide. Young people began asking grandparents about the war, about the silence, about those who returned yet never spoke up. Schools hosted forums for veterans to share their stories. For the first time in years, the tide was not protest or dissent, but empathy like waves soothing wounds long ignored. One afternoon, in the disinfectant-scented hospital room, Tom agreed to meet two young men, Jake and Alex. Both faces bore traces of the past generation's resolve. Tom needed no introduction, their eyes said it all. They sat together in silence for a long moment. No one rushed to speak. A breeze slipped through the window, carrying the sound of the sea, Tom's lifelong soundtrack. Then he began, looking past them, gazing out to the horizon. Listen to the ocean, and listen to each other. Every generation faces its storms. But if we learn to pause, and her no one need perish in silence. Those words were not a command, but a legacy, a torch passed silently between two hands. Alex's hand trembled as he produced an old photograph, his grandfather in uniform, standing beside a young brown-haired sailor holding a diving helmet. The photo was faded, but unusually sharp. Tom looked, paused, then nodded as if someone from the past had just placed a hand on his shoulder. "We were a team," he said, "and I never forgot him." That coincidence or destiny held the room in stillness. No longer old and young, no generational divide, only people grateful that they finally listened. That morning, San Diego's sky was cloudless. The harbor's water lay as still as a mirror, reflecting dozens of Coast Guard vessels lined up like veterans saluting an old comrade. Above them, the national flag fluttered gently in the dawn, breezered, white and blue melding together like the whispered legacy of generations who'd served and been forgotten. This port, where Tom Vance had quietly performed maintenance for nearly 2 decades now, bore his name, Vance Harbor. A name not just to memorialize, but to make amends. The sea never forgets, and this time, neither would humanity. The memorial ceremony was simple yet solemn. On a wooden podium stood a glass display case containing his worn baseball cap, its lighthouse patch faded but still bright in the memory of those who'd heard his voice on that fateful recording. Below it, a bronze plaque read, "Sometimes the sea remembers before men do." Tom stood nearby, recovered now, his gait slow but steady. His face held a serene smile, not of one being honored, but of one who had forgiven. Beside him stood Jake and Alex, two young men who had first listened. Now they were his successors. In Jake's hands was the toolkit Tom once used to teach him how to pilot a boat, and today he was teaching again not just seamanship, but how to stay on course in a world full of storms. The ceremony concluded with a long blast of the foghorn from every vessel, the reverberation sounding out to sea like the ocean's own tribute. No one spoke. No words were needed. Every emotion was etched in their eyes, in the presence of a community that had once doubted but now stood together in respectful silence. Afterward, Alex released a new video, footage of Tom instructing Jake aboard the old tugboat. Tom's voice played softly over a gentle musical bedknot, issuing orders, but offering life lessons. No technology can replace the heart at the helm. Listen to the sea, and listen to one another. Tom's story was not merely a tragedy corrected, but a reminder that justice, though delayed, can arrive and that silent courage never dies. In a nation proud of its freedom and strength, there are still people like Tom who need no audience to keep doing what's right. That legacy doesn't live in speeches, but in Jake's quiet recording of the engine's hum, in Alex's hanging of his grandfather's photo beside Tom's on his desk, in the eyes of children sending lighthouse drawings to the hospital, inscribed, "Thank you for not leaving us behind." Tom didn't need to be remembered as a legend. But we must remember his story as a vital lesson. In a hurried world, the most important thing isn't speed, it's the willingness to listen to small signals, to overlooked people, to warnings dismissed. We believe this story isn't just about one man, it's about all of us, about our fathers and forebears, about the responsibility passed down, not through textbooks, but through living memory in the heart. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to our channel, and comment below, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Who is the silent hero in your life? Share this video with a veteran, a loved one, or friends in the United States. Because sometimes a small story can awaken great gratitude, and because there are lighthouses that never extinguish, if we still remember to look back. Thank you for watching. See you in our next story.